The millionaire was rushing out of work when he heard the urgent scream of his twin daughters. Frightened, they asked him to look under the car, and that's what saved his life. Attached to the wheels, an explosive device revealed. The phone vibrated insistently in the pocket of Richard Miller's Italian suit as he walked through the mirrored hallways of the corporate center. At 45, the entrepreneur had built a tech empire that placed him among the wealthiest men in New York City. His footsteps echoed with the haste of someone constantly living against the clock. Always a call, always a meeting, always a multi-million-dollar deal waiting for his attention. On that March afternoon, the New York humidity clung to his skin like a second shirt. Richard adjusted his silk tie while talking to his CFO about expanding into the European market. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for years, the project that would transform Miller Tech into a true multinational corporation. His words came out fast, precise, loaded with the urgency of someone who couldn't waste a single second. "I need those reports by tomorrow morning," he said into his phone, completely ignoring the movement around him. The deadline with the investors can't be pushed back. It was then that two high-pitched, familiar voices cut through the corporate office's air conditioning. "Daddy, Daddy, wait!" Claire and Louise were running toward him down the building's corridors, their loose, brown hair waving in the wind of their own speed. The 7-year-old twins looked like they had stepped out of a fairy tale, wearing their navy blue school uniforms, their small backpacks bouncing on their thin backs. But there was something on their faces that didn't match the innocence of their age, an urgency, a fear that Richard couldn't immediately identify. "Girls, what are you doing here?" Richard cut the call short, frowning. "How did you get into the building? Where's Melissa?" Louise, the more talkative of the two, grabbed the sleeve of her father's jacket with a strength disproportionate to her small hands. Her brown eyes, identical to her sister's and inherited from the mother they had lost 3 years earlier, were wide in a way that made Richard's stomach clench. "Dad, you can't get in the car," said Claire, the quieter but equally determined one. "Please, you have to look under it first." Richard looked from one daughter to the other, confused. "What are you talking about? Under the car? Why?" The girls exchanged a meaningful glance, as if sharing a terrible secret only they knew. It was something they had done since they could communicate, this silent connection that only twins possess, as if they were two parts of the same soul split in half. "Melissa left the house really early this morning," Louise began, her small voice trembling. "She thought we were sleeping, but I woke up to get some water." "And she was messing around in your office," Claire added, "in the drawers you always keep locked." Richard felt a pang of irritation. They had been through this before. The girls complaining about their stepmother, making up stories, showing that childish jealousy he considered natural after losing their mother. Melissa Sanders had entered their lives like a ray of light after years of darkness, elegant, affectionate, present in a way he never expected to find again after Caroline's passing. "Girls, we've talked about this," Richard said, trying to keep his patience. "Melissa is my wife now. She has the right to be anywhere in our house, and you can't just make things up about her because—" "We're not making it up," Louise interrupted, and there were tears in her eyes. "Daddy, she was speaking on the phone in a different language, and she said today was the day." Richard's heart skipped a beat. Melissa didn't speak any other languages fluently, at least not that he knew of. In the 2 years they had been together, she always asked for help with translations, always dodged meetings with international partners, claiming difficulty with the language. What day? What was she talking about? Richard knelt to be at his daughter's level, something he did less and less lately. The scent of their children's shampoo brought back memories of when they were smaller, of when he still had time to give them baths, to read them stories before bed. Claire looked around nervously before whispering, "She told someone that this afternoon he's going to find out he should have listened to the kids." And then she laughed, Daddy, but it wasn't a nice laugh. A chill ran down Richard's spine. There was something in the way Claire imitated her stepmother's tone that sounded too genuine to be invented. And there were details, small details a 7-year-old couldn't fabricate. "And there's more," Louise continued, grabbing her father's hand. "Last night when you were asleep, she left the house. She was gone for a long time. And when she came back, she smelled like gasoline. Richard's world seemed to tremble slightly. Melissa didn't drive. Since they got married, he was always the one to take the family anywhere, or they used a driver. Why would she smell like gasoline? "Please, Dad," Claire begged, her small hands clasped together in a prayer. "Just look under the car before you get in. If there's nothing there, we'll never complain about Melissa again, we promise." Richard looked at his daughters, really looked, for the first time in months. He saw the genuine fear in their eyes, the way they clung to each other for courage, the almost imperceptible tremor in their lips. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't a tantrum. It was pure terror. And for the first time since he had met Melissa, a real doubt planted itself in his heart like a poisonous seed. "Okay," he said finally, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. "Let's go to the parking garage. But afterward, I want you to explain everything you saw to me." What Richard didn't know was that, at that moment, as his daughters led him through the corridors toward the basement, Melissa was watching everything through the security cameras on her own phone, and her perfect smile finally revealed its true nature. The corporate center's underground parking garage was plunged into an artificial gloom, lit only by emergency lights that cast dancing shadows between the concrete pillars. Richard's black BMW was parked in its reserved spot, impeccable as always, reflecting the coldness of the corporate environment he loved so much. The girls walked on either side of their father, their small hands holding his fingers tightly. Richard could feel his daughter's nervousness through their touch. Claire's hand was cold and sweaty, and Louise was biting her lower lip so hard it had left a small red mark. "There," Louise whispered, pointing to the car. "It's on. The back wheel on the right side." Richard approached cautiously, feeling his heart race without knowing exactly why. It was absurd. Two 7-year-old girls couldn't be right about something so serious. But there was something in the atmosphere, a tension he couldn't ignore, as if the air itself were charged with danger. "Stay here," he instructed, positioning the twins behind a pillar. "Don't move." He knelt slowly, placing one hand on the cold garage floor. At first, he saw nothing but the underside of the chassis, gleaming tires and the oil-stained asphalt. But then, as his eyes adjusted better to the darkness, he saw it. Taped with clear packing tape to the inner part of the rear wheel, almost invisible unless someone was specifically looking for it, was a small package wrapped in black plastic. Thin wires protruded from the edges, connected to something that looked like a rudimentary electronic device. Richard's blood ran cold. He recognized that kind of construction from the action movies he watched with the girls on weekends. It was an improvised explosive device, rigged to detonate with the movement of the wheels. "Oh my God," he murmured. Standing up so quickly he felt dizzy. His legs were shaking as he returned to his daughters, who were watching him with wide eyes. "There really was something, wasn't there, Daddy?" Claire asked in a small voice, as if she already knew the answer from her father's expression. Richard pulled them away from the car, panic taking over his reasoning. "We need to get out of here now," he said, scooping them both into his arms at once, ignoring the weight. "Let's go to the security desk." As he ran toward the garage exit, carrying his daughters, a single question hammered in his mind. How had Melissa gotten access to the building's private parking garage? Only he and 3 other people had the key card for that floor. The security desk was at the main entrance of the building. Carl, the security guard Richard had known for years, stood up immediately upon seeing the businessman arrive, breathless with the 2 girls. "Mr. Miller, what happened? You look pale." "Carl, I need you to call the police immediately," Richard said, trying to control his breathing. "And the bomb squad. There's an explosive device in my car." Carl's eyes widened and he grabbed the phone without hesitation. "Sir, are you sure? How did you—" "My daughters found it," Richard interrupted, looking at Claire and Louise with a mixture of pride and terror. "They saved me." While Carl made the emergency calls, Richard knelt in front of the twins. For the first time in a long time, he truly looked at them. Not with the haste of someone checking if they were okay before leaving for a meeting, but with the full attention of a father who had just realized he had almost lost them forever. "How did you know?" he asked softly. "How did you find out there was something on the car?" Louise exchanged a look with her sister before answering. Melissa has been acting really weird for the past few weeks, Dad. She would stay up after you fell asleep, messing with the computer. And yesterday... Yesterday what? Yesterday she was crying on the phone, Claire continued. But it wasn't sad crying. It was like when we cry watching a scary movie, you know, from being nervous. Richard felt a knot in his stomach. And what else did you see? She took a picture of your car yesterday morning, Louise said, with her phone, and then she sent it to someone on WhatsApp. We saw it because we were having breakfast in the kitchen. Why didn't you tell me sooner? The girls looked down, ashamed. Claire was the first to speak. Because the last time we complained about Melissa, you got mad and said we were just jealous, that she was our mom now. Guilt hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He remembered the conversation 3 months ago when the twins had complained that Melissa was messing with Daddy's things and saying weird stuff on the phone. He had been harsh with them, accusing them of not accepting the new family dynamic. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, hugging them both tightly. "Daddy was so stupid, so stupid." Sirens began to echo in the distance, growing louder as they approached the building. Within minutes, the place was swarming with police officers, firefighters, and the bomb squad. Richard watched from a distance, his daughters pressed against his chest, still trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The bomb squad captain, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, approached them after 40 tense minutes of work. "Mr. Miller, we've confirmed there was indeed a homemade explosive device attached to your vehicle," he said, taking off his helmet. "Rudimentary but potentially lethal. It's been safely disarmed." How would it have worked? It was rigged to detonate with the motion of the wheels. As soon as you started the car and began to drive, the vibration would have activated the mechanism. "You and anyone else in the car..." The captain didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. Richard understood perfectly. "Who had access to the garage in the last 24 hours?" asked the detective who had arrived with the team. "Besides me, only my wife Melissa has the key card for that floor," Richard answered, the reality hitting him like a cold wave. "And the cleaning crew, but they work during the day under supervision." "We're going to need to speak with your wife," the detective said, taking notes. "Where is she now?" Richard glanced at his watch. It was 6:30 in the evening. Melissa should be at home, making dinner, helping the girls with their homework, all the normal things a wife and stepmother would do, but now he wondered, had anything in the last 2 years ever been truly normal in his house? "She should be at home," he replied, but his voice betrayed the uncertainty that was beginning to grow in his chest like a weed. The detective nodded. "We'll need you to accompany us there. And the girls will also have to give a statement, with a child psychologist present." As they left the building, escorted by the police, Louise tugged on her father's shirt sleeve. "Dad, is Melissa going to be mad at us?" Richard stopped walking for a moment, looking down at the daughters who had just saved his life. For the first time, he saw them not as two spoiled, jealous girls, but as two brave young women who had faced a real danger to protect him. "Don't you worry about Melissa," he said, his voice filled with a determination he hadn't felt in years. "Daddy's going to take care of everything now." But even as he said it, a terrible question echoed in his mind. If Melissa was capable of trying to kill him, what else was she planning? And for how long would his daughters truly be safe? What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, Melissa was at home, destroying evidence and preparing a version of events. That would turn her into the perfect victim of an elaborate setup. Richard Miller's Upper East Side townhouse was too quiet when they arrived. Normally at 7 in the evening, Melissa would be in the kitchen preparing dinner, classical music playing on the sound system, the scent of fresh herbs perfuming the air. But that night, only emptiness greeted them. "Melissa!" Richard called out, his voice echoing through the mansion's marble hallways. The twins hid behind him, instinctively huddling together as they did when they were little. "Where are you?" Detective Davis signaled for his men to spread out through the house. "Mr. Miller, it's best if you stay here with the girls while we do an initial sweep." But Louise tugged on her father's arm, whispering urgently, "Dad, she's not here. Her car wasn't in the garage when we pulled up." Richard looked through the living room window and confirmed it. Melissa's white Mercedes was indeed not in its usual spot. A strange feeling settled in his chest. In 2 years of marriage, Melissa had never left the house without telling him, especially around dinner time. Maybe she went to the grocery store, he murmured more to himself than to his daughters. Claire shook her head. Dad, last night she made a weird phone call. We heard it from our room. What kind of call? She was talking about getting this over with and said that after today everything would change, Louise added. And she mentioned numbers, big numbers. The detective returned from the initial sweep with a grim expression. The house seems to have been tidied up in a hurry. There are open drawers in the office, papers scattered about, as if someone was looking for something specific. Richard followed the detective to his private office on the second floor. The room he knew like the back of his hand was completely different. His personal files were out of order, drawers he always kept locked were open, and there were crumpled papers in the trash can. Did she have access to this room? The detective asked. Yes, but Richard hesitated, an uneasy memory surfacing. Actually, a few weeks ago, I noticed some important documents were in different places than where I'd left them. When I asked, Melissa said she was just organizing. The detective began to collect the papers from the trash, carefully smoothing them out. Among them, he found fragments of a life insurance policy. Mr. Miller, did you take out an insurance policy recently? Richard took the pieces of paper, trying to fit them together. The amount made him stagger. $5 million, with Melissa Sanders Miller listed as the sole beneficiary. I never signed this. But is this your signature? The detective pointed to the bottom corner of the page. It was. A perfect match to his handwriting. Richard vaguely remembered one night, 3 weeks ago, when Melissa had come to him with a stack of company documents, asking him to sign some contracts she had organized to speed things up. He had been exhausted after a business trip and had trusted her blindly, signing without reading. She tricked me, he whispered, the reality finally sinking in. She had me sign this without me knowing what it was. The twins appeared at the office door, still hesitant. Claire was holding something in her hands, a small voice recorder that Richard recognized as one of the electronic toys he had bought them for Christmas. Dad, there's something we need to show you, Claire said, holding out the device. We recorded Melissa talking on the phone last night. Richard looked at the detective, who nodded encouragingly. Go ahead and play it, girls. Louise pressed the play button with trembling fingers. Melissa's voice echoed through the office, crystal clear and cold in a way Richard had never heard before. Yes, everything's ready for tomorrow. The device was installed as we discussed. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. The girls tried to warn him a few times, but he doesn't listen to them. 5 million, as agreed. Half now, half after it's all over. Don't worry about the kids. They'll go to a foster home and I'll be out of the country before the funeral even happens. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. The woman with whom he had shared his bed for the past 2 years, to whom he had given his heart and entrusted his daughters, was planning not only to kill him, but to abandon Claire and Louise as if they were disposable trash. There's more, Louise said, her voice choked with emotion. She talked about the company, too. The recording continued, and Melissa's voice became even more calculating. After he's gone, I'll sell the shares to that Chinese group that was interested. They already know the price will drop drastically with the news. Yes, it will look like he was going through financial difficulties, and that I, as the widow, need to liquidate everything quickly. No one will suspect. Everyone knows what a workaholic he is. They'll think it was stress, maybe a heart attack. Richard had to lean on the desk to keep from falling. It wasn't just about the insurance money. Melissa had planned to completely destroy everything he had built, sell his company for a fraction of its real value, and disappear with a fortune. The detective stopped the recording. Mr. Miller, we need to issue an arrest warrant immediately. This recording is enough evidence to— Dad! Claire interrupted him, her voice small and frightened. Melissa's back. Her car is pulling into the garage. They all rushed to the living room window. Indeed, the white Mercedes was parking calmly in the garage, as if it were just another normal evening. Melissa got out of the car carrying grocery bags, her blonde hair perfectly styled, a serene smile on her face. "She's acting like nothing happened," the detective muttered. "Like she doesn't know we've figured everything out." Richard watched the woman he thought he loved walk calmly toward the house. In that moment, he understood that he had never really known Melissa. The 2 years of their marriage had been a meticulously constructed lie. Every smile, every caress, every "I love you" whispered in the dark, all fabricated with the sole purpose of reaching this moment. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We confront her," the detective replied. "But first, I need the girls to be somewhere safe. She might try something desperate when she realizes she's been caught." Louise and Claire clung to their father, their small bodies trembling. "Dad, we're scared of her," Claire whispered. "What if she tries to hurt us too?" Richard hugged his daughters tightly, a cold rage building in his chest. It wasn't just what Melissa had tried to do to him, it was what she had planned for his innocent girls. Foster home. The words echoed in his mind like poison. "She's not going to touch you," he promised, his voice filled with a determination that surprised even himself. Not ever again. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Familiar footsteps approached, accompanied by the cheerful sound of grocery bags being set on the floor. "Richard, girls, I'm home." Melissa's sweet, melodic voice floated up the stairs. "I stopped by the store and got those cookies the girls love." Richard looked at the detective, who gave a silent signal for his men to get into position. This would be the moment of truth, when Melissa Sanders would finally show her true face. But what none of them expected was to discover that she had a backup plan in case she was found out. And that plan involved an accusation that would turn Richard from the victim into the prime suspect. "Richard," Melissa's voice now carried a note of feigned concern, "why are there so many police cars on our street? Did something happen to the neighbors?" Melissa came up the stairs with her usual grace, her high heels echoing on the marble like a sinister metronome. When she entered the living room and saw Richard with the detective and police officers, her expression shifted into a perfect mask of surprise and concern. "Oh my God, Richard, what happened? You look so pale." She moved as if to hug him, but Detective Davis stepped between them. "Mrs. Sanders, I need you to stay where you are. We're investigating an attempted murder." Melissa's eyes widened, and she brought a hand to her chest in a theatrical gesture Richard had seen 1,000 times, but which he now recognized as pure acting. "Attempted murder? What do you mean? Who? Richard, are you okay? And the girls?" She looked around for the twins, who were hiding behind their father. "Claire, Louise, come here to Mommy." "You're not our mum," Claire said in a small but firm voice, gripping her father's shirt tighter. Melissa's face twitched for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of irritation that she quickly masked with a sweet, sad smile. "Of course I'm not, sweetie, but I love you as if you were my own daughters. You know that." She looked at Richard with eyes that shimmered with what looked like genuine tears. "Richard, what is going on? Why are the police here?" The detective showed her the pieces of the insurance policy he had found. "Do you recognize this, Mom?" Melissa examined the papers with a confused expression, frowning in a way that would have convinced anyone of her innocence. It's a life insurance policy, but I don't understand. Richard, did you take out a policy?" "Stop the act," Richard said, his voice trembling with contained anger. "I know everything, Melissa. The bomb in my car, your phone calls, your plans for the girls." For a moment, Melissa's mask slipped completely. Her eyes became as hard as diamonds, and a cruel smile played on her lips. But it was only for an instant before she resumed her role as the confused, betrayed wife. "A bomb? Richard, you're scaring me. What is this all about, and what? Phone calls? I don't know what you're talking about." Louise stepped forward, pulling the recorder from her pocket. "We recorded you, Melissa. Your calls from last night." The blood drained completely from Melissa's face. She stared at the small device as if it were a venomous snake. You spied on me." "Play the recording," the detective ordered. As Melissa's cold, calculating voice echoed through the room, detailing her plans to kill Richard and abandon the girls, she slowly closed her eyes. For a few seconds she remained in absolute silence. When she opened them again, all pretense was gone. "Clever girls. Too clever for your own good," she said, her voice now dripping with pure venom. "I told you to stop meddling in things that weren't your business." Richard felt his daughters tremble behind him. "How could you? They're just children, Melissa. How could you plan what? To give them a better life away from a workaholic father who barely knows their teachers' names?" Melissa laughed bitterly. "You think you're a good father, Richard? When was the last time you helped with their homework? When was the last time you had a real conversation with them?" The words hit Richard like daggers. He knew she was right. In recent months he had grown even more distant from his daughters, delegating all their care to Melissa. "But that doesn't give you the right to try to kill me," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Kill you?" Melissa tilted her head as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I was setting you free, Richard. You're miserable. You live stressed out, work 16 hours a day, and barely know your own daughters. It would have been a favor." The detective approached with handcuffs. "Melissa Sanders, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy." "Wait," Melissa interrupted, holding up a hand. A disturbing smile appeared on her lips. "You really think I would do this alone? That I'd have the technical knowledge to build a bomb?" Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you implying?" "I'm saying you're about to make a terrible mistake. I'm not the only one involved in this. In fact," she paused dramatically, "I'm a victim too. I've been blackmailed for months." "Blackmailed?" The detective frowned. "How so?" Melissa walked to the window, looking out at the street as if expecting to see someone. "6 months ago I started receiving anonymous messages. Someone knew about irregularities in Richard's company, tax evasion, fraudulent contracts, bribery of public officials." "That's a lie," Richard exploded. "My company is clean." "Is it?" Melissa turned to him with a venomous smile. "Then explain this." She pulled a flash drive from her pocket that Richard recognized. It was one he kept locked in his personal safe. "Here are all your transactions from the last 3 years, including the undeclared payments to speed up government permits, the ghost employees on the payroll, and the inflated sales to shell companies." Richard's heart stopped for a moment. That flash drive contained information that could completely destroy his reputation and his company. Worse, some of those irregularities did exist. Minor accounting adjustments his accountant had suggested to reduce taxes. "How did you get this? My safe—" "It wasn't hard to figure out the password," Melissa said casually. "The girl's birthday, way too obvious. Anyway, as I was saying, someone found this information and started blackmailing me. They said if I didn't cooperate with their plan, they'd turn everything over to the IRS and the press." The detective took the flash drive from Melissa's hand. "And who is this blackmailer?" "I never knew. The messages always came from different numbers, temporary emails, but whoever it is knows Richard and the company very well. Someone on the inside." Louise tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad, she's lying. We heard her laughing on the call. She didn't sound like she was being forced to do anything." Melissa looked at the girl with disdain. "Children hear what they want to hear. Maybe I was laughing out of nervousness, or maybe—" She took a calculated pause. "Maybe I was laughing because I had finally found a way out of this whole situation." "What do you mean?" Richard asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Simple. I decided to turn you in before they turned me in. I gathered all the evidence of your company's irregularities and was ready to hand it over to the authorities. The bomb in the car, that was a last desperate resort by the real criminals when they found out I was going to expose them." The room fell silent as everyone processed the new version of events. It was elaborate enough to create doubt, especially since Melissa actually had evidence of irregularities in the company. But Claire, who had remained quiet until then, stepped forward. "If you were being blackmailed, why did you talk about selling the company's shares? Why did you say you were going to leave the country? Why did you talk about putting us in a foster home?" Melissa hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for everyone to realize she didn't have a prepared answer for that question. I was just repeating what they told me to say." It was part of the act to— To what? Louise interrupted. To convince who? There was no one else on the call but you. The detective approached Melissa again. Your explanations are getting less and less convincing, ma'am, and this recording clearly shows— The sound of tires screeching on the street cut him off. Through the window they could all see 3 black SUVs pulling up in front of the house. Men in suits got out of the vehicles, walking purposefully toward the entrance. Melissa smiled for the first time since she had arrived home. Looks like my backup has arrived. Richard looked out the window with growing unease. Who were these people? And why did Melissa seem so relieved by their arrival? The doorbell rang, followed by firm knocks on the door. A commanding male voice shouted from outside, "FBI, open the door. We have a search and seizure warrant." The FBI agent who entered the room had the rigid posture of someone accustomed to commanding complex operations. Tall, with military-cut graying hair, he surveyed everyone present with calculating eyes before speaking. "Mr. Richard Miller, I'm Agent Morris, FBI. We have a search and seizure warrant for this residence and for all computers and documents related to Miller Tech." Richard felt the floor drop out from under him. "What do you mean? I don't understand. We're investigating an assassination attempt against me." "We're aware of the situation, sir. In fact, that's precisely why we're here." Agent Morris looked at Melissa with an expression Richard couldn't decipher. "Mrs. Sanders, could you step forward, please?" Melissa walked toward the agent with confident steps, as if this wasn't the first time they had met. Detective Davis watched, his confusion growing. "Agent Morris, I need to clarify that we have evidence that Mrs. Sanders planned and executed an attempted homicide against her husband. We have recordings." "We're aware of that as well, Detective Davis, but there are factors in this investigation that go far beyond a simple domestic murder attempt." Richard hugged the twins tighter, sensing that something terrible was about to happen. "What do you mean by that? What factors?" Agent Morris pulled a file from the portfolio he was carrying. "Mr. Miller, how long have you really known your wife?" 2 years. We met at a tech conference in— Richard stopped, a disturbing memory surfacing. "Actually, now that I think about it, she was the one who approached me at that event, said she was an investor." "Melissa Sanders is not an investor, Mr. Miller. That's not even her real name." The agent opened the file, revealing several photographs. "Her real name is Marina Oliver Smith, and she's an undercover agent who has been working for us for 5 years. The silence that followed was so thick that the sound of the children's breathing seemed amplified. Richard looked at Melissa, Marina, as if he were seeing a complete stranger, because, he now realized, that's exactly what she was. "An undercover agent?" Louise asked in her small voice. "Like in the movies?" Marina finally spoke, her voice now completely different, firmer, more professional, without the sweet melodic tone Richard knew. "Richard, I'm sorry it came to this. I really am." "You're sorry," Richard exploded, his voice filled with a rage and pain he didn't know he possessed. "You pretended to love me for 2 years. You pretended to love my daughters. You tried to kill me." "I never tried to kill you," Marina said firmly. "The bomb was a dummy device. It wasn't functional. It was planted there to force the situation to the point it's at now," Agent Morris confirmed with a nod. "The device was harmless, Mr. Miller. It was staged to get us to this moment." "What moment?" Richard felt like he was in a nightmare. "I don't understand anything that's happening. 3 years ago, we received intelligence that Miller Tech was being used as a front for a money laundering operation by an international criminal organization," the agent explained. "Not by you specifically, but by someone inside the company with access to the financial systems." Richard shook his head vigorously. "That's impossible. I've known all my employees for years." "Mr. Miller," Marina interrupted, "for the past 2 years, while I've been in your home, I discovered that someone was manipulating the company's transactions remotely. It wasn't you. Your tax irregularities are minor compared to what was really going on." Agent Morris showed him a series of documents. Millions of dollars were passing through Miller Tech monthly, coming from offshore accounts and being cleaned through fictitious contracts. The money was from arms and drug trafficking for a Colombian cartel. "This is insane," Richard yelled. "My company has nothing to do with cartels. We develop educational software." "Which is exactly why it was the perfect cover," Marina said sadly. "A respected company with a solid reputation, run by a family man who would never be a suspect." Claire tugged on her father's shirt. "Dad, does this mean that Marina, didn't really want to hurt us?" Marina knelt to the girl's level, her eyes shining with tears that, this time, seemed genuine. "Girls, I know this is very confusing, but you two are the most important people I've met in the last 5 years. Everything I felt for you was real." "But you were going to put us in a foster home," Louise accused, her small hands clenched into fists. "That was part of the act to convince the real criminals that I was on their side. I would never, ever harm you. Never." Richard watched the interaction with a mix of anger and confusion. Part of him wanted to believe that Marina had genuinely cared for his daughters, but another part refused to accept that everything in his life for the past 2 years had been a lie. "If you're a federal agent, why didn't you tell me the truth?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you let me fall in love with you?" Marina looked down. Because it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was just supposed to infiltrate, gather evidence, and get out. But you three," she looked at Richard and the twins, "you became my real family, and that complicated everything." Agent Morris cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, we need your cooperation to identify who is really behind this operation. Our investigation indicates it's someone close to you, someone with full access to the company's systems." "Who?" Richard asked, though a terrible suspicion was beginning to form in his mind. "Someone who knows your passwords, your schedule, your family routine," Marina said softly. "Someone who knew I was a federal agent, because they tried to eliminate me using you as a scapegoat." Richard thought of all the people who had privileged access to his life and company. His accountant, Robert, who handled all financial transactions. His junior partner, Frank, who was always pushing for questionable expansions. His assistant, Lucy, who had access to all his appointments and passwords. "There's something else," Agent Morris continued. "Whoever the real culprit is, they found out Marina was an undercover agent 3 weeks ago. That's why she accelerated the fake bomb operation. She needed to reveal herself before she was actually assassinated." 3 weeks ago, Richard murmured, remembering. "That's when I unknowingly signed that insurance policy, and when some important documents disappeared from my office at the company." "Exactly. Someone was planting evidence to frame you in case Marina was killed," the agent explained. "The plan was to eliminate the undercover agent and make it look like you had killed your wife for the insurance money." Claire hesitantly took Marina's hand. "Melissa? Marina? Are you in danger?" Marina smiled sadly at the girl. "I was, sweetie. But now that everything is out in the open, you and I are safe." "What? About my dad?" Louise asked, showing a perception beyond her 7 years. Just then, Richard's phone rang. The name on the screen made his blood run cold. Frank Anderson, his business partner and best friend of 15 years. Agent Morris signaled for him to answer, activating a recording system. "Hello, Frank." "Richard, thank God. I just heard there was some trouble at your house. Are you and the girls okay?" Frank's concerned voice sounded perfectly natural, but there was something behind it that Richard could now perceive, a forced tension. "We're fine, Frank. Actually, we found out some interesting things today." "Like what?" "Richard, your voice sounds strange. Did something happen?" Richard looked at Agent Morris, who nodded encouragingly. "Frank, how long have you known that Marina is a federal agent?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted an eternity. When Frank finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. It was cold, calculating, unrecognizable. "Congratulations, Richard. You finally figured it out. Too bad it's too late." The call continued on speakerphone, and Frank's voice echoed through the room with a coldness that made Richard shiver. 15 years of friendship, of absolute trust, of sharing dreams and achievements, all unraveling in seconds. "Frank, how could you?" Richard asked, his voice thick with pain. "We built the company together. You're my daughter's godfather." "Oh, Richard, always so sentimental." Frank laughed bitterly. Did you really think I was satisfied being the junior partner all these years, watching you swim in money while I got the scraps? Agent Morris gestured for them to keep Frank talking while he traced the call's location. Marina held the twins' hands, subtly moving them toward the door in case they needed to leave quickly. "Scraps?" Richard nearly shouted. "You've made millions from our partnership. You have a comfortable life your family has never wanted for anything." "Comfortable," Frank repeated with disdain. "While you were buying townhouses and imported cars, I had to settle for an apartment on the Upper West Side. While your daughters went to the best private schools, my daughter had to settle for public school because you accidentally forgot to approve my profit-sharing increases." Richard fell silent, a heavy guilt settling in his chest. It was true that Frank had asked several times to renegotiate his stake in the company, and Richard had always found excuses to postpone those conversations. "That doesn't justify betrayal, Frank," he said finally. "Much less getting involved with drug cartels." "Betrayal?" Frank laughed again, but there was a deep bitterness in his voice. "The betrayal started when you promised me an equal partnership and then kept changing the contracts on your own, reducing my share year after year. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Claire whispered to Marina. "What's a cartel?" Marina knelt, speaking softly. "They're very bad people, sweetie, but don't worry, you're safe now. When the Colombians approached me 3 years ago offering a fortune to use our company as a front, I saw the perfect opportunity," Frank continued. "You didn't even notice when I started creating the shell companies, the fictitious contracts. You were always too busy with your important meetings." Agent Morris showed on his tablet that he had triangulated the call's location. Frank was at JFK Airport, likely trying to flee the country. "And Marina? How did you find out she was a federal agent?" Richard asked, trying to buy time. "Ah, your dear wife," Frank said in a venomous tone. "Last year, when she started asking questions about the company's finances, I hired a private investigator to follow her. I found out she was meeting regularly with FBI agents. That's when I realized you were all smarter than I thought." Marina closed her eyes, clearly blaming herself for being discovered. "Frank, you know we're going to catch you. Why don't you just turn yourself in?" "Marina, my dear, or should I say Agent Smith?" Frank laughed. "Do you really think I don't have an escape plan? I'm 5 minutes away from boarding a flight to a country with no extradition. And best of all, Richard is going to take all the blame." "What do you mean?" Agent Morris interjected. "Simple. Over the last 6 months, I've created a perfect evidence trail showing that Richard found out about the illegal activities and decided to partner with the cartels to get even richer. When the investigation digs deeper, they'll find offshore accounts in his name, records of trips he never took, and forged emails negotiating drug shipments." Richard felt the world spinning around him. "That's a lie. I never—" "Of course it's a lie, Richard, but it's very well documented. And when they find Marina dead—" "Dead?" Marina turned pale. "Frank, you can't—" "Actually, I've already set the plan in motion. There's a sniper positioned in the buildings near your house. As soon as I give the signal, he'll fire through the living room window. The investigation will conclude that Richard killed his wife to silence her about his criminal dealings." The twins clung to Marina, terrified by what they heard. Louise started to cry softly, and Claire, despite being the quieter one, looked panicked. Agent Morris immediately spoke into his radio. "Alpha Team, we have a sniper in the vicinity. Sweep all buildings within a 500-yard radius of the residence. Code Red." "Frank, your daughters are here," Richard said, desperate. "My daughters, whom you held in your arms when they were babies, who call you uncle. How can you do this with them here?" "Ah, yes, the girls." Frank paused, and when he spoke again, there was something different in his voice, a hesitation that wasn't there before. I didn't want them to be here. The plan was for them to be at school." "But we are here, Uncle Frank," Claire said, approaching the phone with a courage that surprised everyone. "And you're scaring us." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for long seconds. Louise joined her sister. "Uncle Frank, do you remember when Mommy died and you stayed with us for 3 days? You made that yummy mac and cheese and watched cartoons with us. Frank's voice trembled noticeably. I remember, girls. Then why do you want to hurt Daddy? Claire asked, with the devastating innocence of children. And why do you want to hurt Marina? She's nice to us and helps us with our homework. Marina wiped tears from her eyes, moved by the girl's defense. Because, Frank began, but his voice failed him. Because sometimes grown-ups do bad things when they're hurt. And I was very hurt by your daddy. But hurting back doesn't fix anything, Louise said with a wisdom that shouldn't belong to a 7-year-old. Our teacher always says we have to talk when we're mad. Agent Morris received a message on his radio. Sniper located. Building neutralized. Suspect in custody. Frank, the agent said into the phone, your sniper has been arrested. It's over. Turn yourself in now, and maybe we can negotiate a lighter sentence. No, Frank replied, but his voice was broken. I can't go back now. I've done too much. I've hurt too many people. Richard approached the phone. Frank, you can still redeem yourself. Your daughters are going to need you no matter what happens. They're going to need you to be a man they can be proud of when they grow up. My daughters, Frank whispered. What will I tell them? How will they look at me after all this? Marina stepped closer. Frank, I can give you my word as a federal agent that if you surrender now and cooperate with the investigation, we will recommend you be placed in witness protection. You can rebuild your life and your daughters can visit you. And if I don't, surrender. Then you'll be considered an international fugitive. Your assets will be seized and your family will be left with nothing. Your daughters will grow up knowing their father chose to run away instead of fighting for them. The silence stretched for more than a minute. Finally, Frank's voice returned, but now it was filled with resignation. Richard, can you forgive me? Richard looked at his daughters, who were watching the conversation with wide eyes, and at Marina, who had risked her life to protect his family. He thought of all the years of friendship that had been corrupted by greed and resentment. Frank, I don't know if I can forgive you right now, but maybe with time, maybe we can find a way for you to redeem yourself. Okay, Frank said, his voice sounding exhausted. I'm turning myself in. But I want to speak to Claire and Louise in person before I'm arrested. I want to apologize to them. Agent Morris nodded. That can be arranged, as long as it's in a controlled environment. As the details of Frank's arrest were being organized, Richard looked around the room. His life had been completely turned upside down in a matter of hours, but one thing was clear. His daughters had saved not only his life, but they had also touched the heart of a man lost in darkness. The question now was whether this shattered family could rebuild itself after so much betrayal and painful discovery. 3 days later, Richard found himself in a visiting room at the FBI field office, watching as a handcuffed Frank was escorted to the table where they sat. The man he had considered his best friend looked like he had aged a decade in just 72 hours. Disheveled hair, an unshaven face, and red eyes from lack of sleep. Claire and Louise sat on either side of their father, their small hands nervously intertwined. Marina was there too, but she kept a respectful distance, still navigating the complex territory of her new identity in this family's life. "Hello, girls," Frank said in a hoarse voice as he sat down. His trembling hands moved toward the cuffs, as if wanting to remove them to hug the twins, but he remembered his situation. "Hi, Uncle Frank," Louise replied shyly. "Are you okay? You look sad." Frank closed his eyes for a moment, fighting back tears. I am very sad, sweetie. Very, very sad that I did bad things that hurt you and your daddy." Claire, always the more observant one, studied the face of the man she had known since birth. "Uncle Frank, why did you do those things? You were always nice to us." "Because I was very angry and jealous of your daddy," Frank answered with painful honesty. "And when you stay angry for a long time, sometimes you make very bad choices. Very, very bad." Richard watched the interaction in silence, battling contradictory emotions. Part of him wanted to scream at Frank to unleash all the rage he felt over the betrayal. Another part felt pity seeing the man who had been like a brother to him, destroyed by his own choices. "Daddy gets angry sometimes too," Louise commented innocently. But he never hurts anyone. He just goes to his office and slams his fist on the desk. Frank managed a sad smile. Your daddy is a much better man than I am, little one. He always was. Uncle Frank, Claire leaned forward. Are you going to be in jail forever? The question hit Frank like a punch to the gut. He looked at Richard, seeking some guidance on how to answer a child about the consequences of his actions. I'm going to be in jail for a very long time. Yes, Frank finally replied. Because when we do bad things, we have to accept the consequences. But who knows? If I behave well and help the police catch the bad people who made me do those bad things, maybe one day I can get out and try to be a better person. Marina, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. Frank, your daughters want to see you. They don't know the details, but they know you're in trouble. What do you want me to tell them? Frank lowered his head, his shoulders shaking with the weight of responsibility. Tell them their daddy made some very big mistakes, but that he loves them more than anything in the world, and that he's going to spend the rest of his life trying to make up for it, even if it's from prison. I'll take care of them, Marina said softly. I'll make sure they get the counseling they need, and that they can visit you when they're ready. Richard finally spoke, his voice heavy with pain. Frank, there's one thing I need to understand. All this time, while you were planning to destroy me, you kept coming to the barbecues at my house, playing with the girls, being their godfather. How could you look at them knowing what you were planning? Frank looked up and Richard saw genuine anguish in his eyes. That was the hardest part, Richard. Every time I saw them, a part of me wanted to give it all up. They reminded me of the man I used to be, before greed and resentment consumed me. Then why didn't you stop? Claire asked with the simple logic of a child. Because I was too ashamed to admit what I had done, Frank explained, and the deeper I dug the hole, the harder it was to get out, until it got to a point where I thought the only way out was to see it through to the end. Louise got up from her chair and walked over to Frank, ignoring the protests of the security agent present. She wrapped her small arms around the handcuffed man, who began to cry silently. I still like you, Uncle Frank, she whispered. Even though you did bad things. But you have to promise you'll try to be good again. I promise, my princess, Frank murmured into the girl's hair. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve this hug. Claire joined the hug, and for a moment the room was completely silent, only the sound of Frank's sobs echoing off the cold walls. When the girls returned to their seats, Richard leaned forward. Frank, I need you to help me understand something. How am I going to explain to the girls that all the company's money, our house, their lifestyle, it could all be at risk if more irregularities are found? Most of the dirty money went through separate accounts I created without your knowledge, Frank explained. The company's legitimate finances are clean. You might lose some contracts when this all goes public, but the foundation of Miller Tech is solid, Marina intervened. I've already spoken with my superiors about this, Richard. The FBI will issue a statement clarifying that you were a victim of the operation, not a participant. That should minimize the damage to the company's reputation. And what about the charges I might face for corporate negligence? With Frank's cooperation and the evidence we've collected, you'll likely only face fines for minor tax irregularities. Nothing that will seriously compromise your assets. Richard felt a huge sense of relief, but there was another question that tormented him. Frank, when you found out Marina was a federal agent, why didn't you just run? Why did you come up with this whole plan to frame me? Frank hesitated before answering. Because I wanted you to feel what I felt all those years. The betrayal, the feeling of having your life destroyed by someone you trusted. I wanted you to lose everything just like I thought I had. But you hadn't lost anything, Richard said, genuinely confused. You were wealthy, respected. You had a beautiful family. I had lost my dignity, Frank replied bitterly. Every day coming into the company and knowing I was just the junior partner, that I depended on your goodwill for everything. Every time you made a major decision without consulting me, every time you changed something in the contracts without telling me, it was like I was just a well-paid employee. Richard absorbed these words. a painful understanding dawning on him. "Frank, if you had just told me how you felt, would you have listened, really?" Frank asked. "Or would you have given me a polite answer and kept doing things your way?" Richard's silence was answer enough. Claire broke the tense moment. "Uncle Frank, when you get out of jail, can you be friends with Daddy again?" Frank looked at Richard with an expression full of regret and hope. "That's up to your daddy, little one. If he can ever find it in his heart to forgive me, I would very much like to try and rebuild our friendship, but what I did might be unforgivable." Richard looked at his daughters, who were watching the conversation with hopeful eyes, then at Marina, who had risked her life to protect his family, and finally at Frank, destroyed by his own choices. "Forgiveness isn't something you grant overnight," he said finally. "But maybe with a lot of time and a lot of effort on your part, we can find a way back to friendship. It won't be the same as before, but maybe it can be something new and honest." Frank nodded, tears streaming down his face. "That's more than I deserve, Richard, much more." The security agent signaled that visiting time was over. Frank stood up slowly, taking one last look at the twins. "Take good care of your daddy," he said, "and always remember that you are the bravest girls I've ever known. You're the ones who saved this whole family." As Frank was escorted back to his cell, Richard pulled his daughters into a tight hug. There was a lot of work ahead: family therapy, rebuilding his relationship with Marina, making decisions about the company's future. But for the first time in days, he felt there was hope. The girls had shown a wisdom and strength that both humbled and inspired him. And maybe, precisely because of that strength, the whole family could emerge from this ordeal more united and stronger than ever. 6 months later, Richard was sitting in his backyard, watching Claire and Louise play on the swing set he had installed himself, one of the many changes he had made to be more present in his daughters' lives. The afternoon sun gilded their brown hair as they laughed, and for the first time in years, Richard felt a genuine sense of peace. The company had weathered the scandal better than expected. With Frank's cooperation in the investigation and the FBI's public clarification of his role as a victim, Miller Tech had kept most of its clients and even won new contracts, attracted by the transparency Richard had implemented in all its processes. But the biggest changes had happened at home. Richard now worked part-time, delegating responsibilities to a trusted team he had hired after a full audit. His mornings and afternoons were dedicated to the twins. He drove them to school himself, helped with homework, watched their favorite cartoons, and most importantly, he truly listened to them. "Dad, look how high I can swing," Louise shouted from the swing, her feet nearly touching the branches of the old oak tree. "Be careful, Princess, not that high," Richard called back, but his tone was one of affection, not the impatience of before. Marina, she had kept the name the girls knew, appeared at the kitchen door drying her hands on an apron. Her situation had been complicated to resolve. Officially, her mission as an undercover agent was over, but personally, she had become an integral part of this family. "Dinner's almost ready," she announced. "Claire, can you get your sister to come wash her hands?" The past few months had been a period of adjustment for everyone. Marina had been transferred to an administrative position at the FBI, working in witness protection, a way for her to continue using her skills without having to infiltrate other families. Richard had insisted she continue living with them, not just because the girls loved her, but because he himself had discovered that the feelings he had developed for her were real, regardless of her true identity. "Marina," Claire said as she came inside, "do you remember when you were Melissa and you were pretending to be someone else?" Marina knelt to the girl's level. "I remember, sweetie. Why do you ask?" "It's weird, but I think I like you more now," Claire said with the brutal honesty of a child. "When you were Melissa, you smiled a lot, but your eyes were sad sometimes. Now your eyes smile too." Marina felt her own eyes well up with tears. It was true. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't playing a role. She could be herself with this family, and it had been liberating in a way she hadn't expected. During dinner, Louise chatted excitedly about the science presentation she was giving at school next week. "It's about how listening can save lives," she said. "I'm going to tell our story, but without using real names." Richard nearly choked on his food. Our story? Are you sure that's a good idea? The teacher said it's important for people to know that kids sometimes see things that grown-ups don't, Claire explained, and that parents should always listen when their kids say something is wrong. Marina and Richard exchanged a look. The girls had processed the entire traumatic experience in a surprisingly mature way, turning it into a life lesson they wanted to share. You really want to tell this story to the whole school? Richard asked. Yes, they both said in unison, because maybe some other kid at school is trying to tell their parents something important, but the parents aren't listening. After dinner, while the girls watched TV in the living room, Richard and Marina sat on the terrace to talk, as they had every night for the past few months. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would be like if the girls hadn't noticed the bomb that day, Richard said, gazing at the stars. It wouldn't be a life, Marina replied simply. You'd be dead, I probably would be too, and they'd be in a foster home. Frank would have fled the country and never been caught. And now? Marina smiled. Now Frank is fully cooperating with the investigation. His cartel contacts led to the dismantling of a network that was laundering money through companies all over the country. He'll serve his time, but he'll likely get a reduced sentence for good behavior and cooperation. And what about us? Richard asked, taking her hand. What are we now, a couple? A weird family? Ex-undercover agent and ex-target? Marina laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that Richard had learned to distinguish from her rehearsed laughs of the past. We're what we always should have been from the start, a real family, built on honesty and real love, not on lies and missions. Can I ask you a question I've always wanted to ask? Of course. At any point during those 2 years, did you actually fall in love with me? Or was it all just part of the performance? Marina turned to face him fully. Richard, 3 months into the mission, I already knew I was emotionally compromised. 6 months in, I was head over heels in love with you and the girls. By the first year, I was seriously considering abandoning the mission and telling you the truth. Why didn't you? Because I was scared, she admitted. Scared you would hate me for the lie. Scared of losing the 3 of you. Scared the girls would never be able to forgive me. And also because I knew Frank was planning something. I just didn't know what. Richard absorbed her words in silence. Then he stood up and knelt in front of Marina, pulling a small box from his pocket. Marina Smith, FBI agent, former undercover operative, second mother to my daughters and the love of my life, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. Will you marry me? For real this time? Marina looked at the ring, then at the man she had learned to genuinely love, and finally at the 2 girls peeking through the living room window with enormous smiles on their faces. Did they know you were going to do this? She asked, laughing through her tears. It was their idea, Richard admitted. Claire said you're already our family anyway, so why not make it official? And Louise said this way you'd never have to pretend to be someone else again. Marina held out her hand, trembling slightly. Yes, Richard Miller, I will marry you, and this time I promise there will be no secrets between us. As Richard slipped the ring onto her finger, Claire and Louise burst into cheers and ran out onto the terrace, jumping into the arms of the 2 adults. Now we're a real family, Louise declared. We always were, Claire corrected. We just didn't know it yet. That night after the girls were asleep, Richard sat in his office to write a letter he had promised himself he would write. It was addressed to Frank, who was serving his sentence in a federal prison. Frank, he began, your daughters came to visit us last week with their mother. They're doing well, growing up strong and smart, just like you always knew they would. They made sure to give me a drawing for you. It's enclosed with this letter. It's a picture of the 2 of you when you get out of prison, playing in the park like you used to. I want you to know that I'm taking care of their child support as promised, and that your ex-wife has been receptive to the financial help. I also want you to know that Claire and Louise ask about you every week and are looking forward to visiting when you feel ready. Marina and I are getting married next month. It's a small ceremony, just close family. I know it sounds ironic to say this, but you're still considered family, despite everything. Your daughters will be flower girls, along with mine. I hope you're using this time to reflect and to heal. The man I knew for 15 years still exists somewhere inside you, and I hope he finds his way back. The girls are right when they say we should always give the people we love a second chance. When you're ready for that second chance, we'll be here. Your friend, and I hope I can say that again one day, Richard. As he sealed the letter, Richard looked out the window at the yard where his daughters had played until sunset. They were the true heroes of this story, 2 7-year-old girls who had saved not just his life but their entire family, simply because they had the courage to say, "Dad, look under the car." In that simple sentence lay the most important lesson he had ever learned. Sometimes wisdom comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the ones who save us are the very people we least expect, the small voices we insist on not hearing, the watchful eyes we choose to ignore, the pure hearts that see what our tired, adult eyes no longer can. And Richard Miller made a silent promise to himself and to his daughters. He would never stop listening again. He would never again dismiss one of their concerns as too small. He would never again assume that his adult experience was more valuable than the pure intuition of 2 7-year-old girls, because in the end, they were the ones who truly knew to look down when it mattered most, and that's what saved everyone.